And welcome to another edition of the Talk of Tuckahoe. I'm Paul Votano, and we're coming to you once again from the beautiful Roman Gardens of Alex and Henry's in Eastchester. We want to thank our hosts Mario Faustini and Nat Racine for having us here. Our guest today is veteran newspaper man John Randazzo. John, welcome to the program.
Nice to meet you.
John has been, or was, I should say, a native of New York City, but for the past 35 years or so, he's lived at various times in Chappaqua, Yonkers, and, of course, right now in Tuckahoe for a number of years. He's been married to the same lady for, we just counted it up, 45 years plus. His lovely wife, Sigrid.
And maintaining.
Wonderful. He has two children, a boy and a girl, and 4 grandchildren. And John is a veteran of the United States Army.
Marine Corps.
I'm sorry, it's even better. United States Marine Corps, served in World War II, started as a private, was called back in the Korean War, and retired not too many years ago as a major. So he's had a very distinguished career there as well as in the newspaper business.
Thank you.
But John, let me ask you this. I know you started out in the newspaper business, if you can call it a business, when you were still in high school.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, I'd like to. I attended the High School of Commerce, and at the same time I played football there. And I was also a correspondent at a penny a word to the Herald Tribune. I'd send in stories about the sports at the high school, how the basketball team did, how the track team did, swimming team, soccer, and football, which I played. And several times I had to mention myself in the story, which is about a paragraph of 50 words that went to the Herald Tribune, for which, they, as I said before, they gave me a penny a word, about 50 cents per item. I made a big $1.50 a week sometimes. And I also wrote for the school paper, you'd be glad to know, Paul.
Sure.
And that's where it really all started.
And then, of course, later on you enrolled at Columbia University, from which you graduated. And now, let me have the scenario on that. You started with the Daily News, I believe, following your service in World War II, correct?
Yes.
1946.
I got back from Japan in 1945, and around St. Patrick's Day of 1945, and 46 rather, 46, because it's 1945, we were still over there waiting to assault Japan. 46, I returned from occupation duty in about March or April, and made a contact in the Marine Corps, a person by the name of Guy Richards, who was a rewrite man for the news and was a major in the Marine Corps on Guam, where I met him. We flew back to the States, or he flew back to the States, and I went to Pearl Harbor. And knowing that he was a rewrite man at the news and a major at the time when I was a second lieutenant, he said, "John, if you're looking for a job, come up to see me when you get back from overseas." I said, "Sure, I'd be glad to." He thought I was going to get wrapped up and, you know, be left out there pushing up daisies in the Pacific, but it never happened. And when I came back in 46, I looked up Guy Richards, so that's how I got a job as a copy boy at $23 a week at the news. The Marine Corps at the time was paying me $40 a week, or $160 a month. But I went in as a copy boy or office boy. 46.
And how long were you a copy boy before you started to get writing assignments? Or
I was on the city desk there as a copy boy for about 6 to 7 months, and I was assigned to the desk that was called then the News Around the Clock desk, which wrote news, 5-minute news capsules for the station WNEW. I was there for about a year, and after that went upstairs to the WPIX, where I did some assistant news work for the station upstairs. And then when the campaign, the 1948 presidential campaign ended, I went back downstairs as a copy boy to wait as an assignment as a reporter, hopefully, which didn't come because I went to work on a picture desk at the news, and then a war broke out, the Korean War, for which I was called back. But in the meantime, I get way ahead of myself. I'm 47. I signed up at Columbia to go to school there, at the undergraduate school. And then the war broke out in 1950, interrupting my work at the news and my education, which came under the GI Bill of Rights. So that's where it all started, just about.
Now, you eventually started getting assignments, writing assignments, and you covered some of the boroughs, as I recall.
Yes, I covered Queens, oh my God, I shouldn't do that. Queens, Brooklyn, Manhattan, Jersey, Westchester County sometimes. They were just starting up the suburban section in those days. And I spent a lot of time working in Long Island, Queens, and Staten Island, all the suburban beats to get our suburban sections going.
Now you started this career, and then eventually you worked on some of the biggest stories that ever took place in this greater metropolitan area.
I had some pretty good ones, that's right, Paul, over the last 10 years actually. Before I retired about 5 years ago, and right before that, some of the stories I put down here on paper because my memory at my age, excuse me, although not faulty, is not steady. So I've got to help it with this piece of paper.
Go right ahead.
And one of the more recent stories was that right before, months before I retired, or maybe a year before, was, several years before, was a story of Klaus von Bülow, who was charged in 1984, I think, of trying to kill his wife through injections. I'm sure many of you know that. And I worked on that for several assignments. Another one was Kevin Markham, who was the one of the leads in the musical Cats in 1987, who died of a cocaine overdose. Larry Davis.
Yeah, we all remember Larry Davis.
Yes, who
shot it up with the police department.
Yeah, you do remember that. Yeah,
in the Bronx.
6 cops in the Bronx.
Yeah,
right. You're right. And then, of course, there's a bridge collapse right up here at between Greenwich and Portchester. Is it?
Yes, that's right. You covered that too.
Yeah, that was another one. And Gene Harris. I guess everybody remembers that. Dr. Tonauer.
Of course.
Whom she shot and killed in what I guess is one of the best lovers' spats in the last 100 years.
I guess so.
And the Bronfman kidnapping trial that was up here too. Several murders and assorted horrible stories in the city and suburbs. So many. I've got about 5 telephone books, old telephone books filled with stories I wrote, pasted in, that my wife Sigrid started many years ago, hoping that perhaps, and much brighter than me, by the way, that I might use that for the basis for a book one day. So what do you do with 5 telephone books filled with byline stories?
One of the things we were chatting about before we came on the air was the sources are so important to you when you're developing these stories. Tell us, our audience, about that.
Well, when you're in a business like I've been for 42 years, you develop a lot of sources. This one on on Klaus von Bülow was a point that I'd like to make regarding sources.
Okay.
Klaus had been found guilty and had been freed on, I think, $1 million bail, was living on 5th Avenue in Manhattan. And a doorman I'd gotten to know in that building, I shouldn't say that, but he's probably dead at this time anyway, called me once to tell me that he thought that he had seen lawyers going upstairs to the apartment up on the 13th floor, I forget where it was, that Mr. Von Bulow had gotten a second trial. So I called the office, I called Von Bulow, whose number I had and whom I'd spoken to during various stories, and he said, yes, that's true, I have a new trial coming up, and the second trial, of course, with Alan Dershowitz.
Right.
He beat that case. Another good point in question is the bridge collapse. A doorman helped me with that story. That's a source. With Kevin Markham, the man in Cats, or the lead in Cats, who died of a cocaine overdose, a member of the cast, who I believe was working also when he was at liberty, as the saying goes, at a local restaurant, and where I'd go eat once in a while, and he let me know that the body had been found in his apartment. And sources of all kind, policemen, assistant district attorneys, politicians who want to get one up on their competitors, the other ones running, they'll tip you off, all very sedately and secretly, of course, and you're not supposed to divulge those sources. Sources are very important.
Right. There have been a number of trials where people have tried to get reporters to name their sources, and
Sure.
that has never been upheld. I mean,
That's right.
a source is a private deal, and
And a source, Paul, could also get you in trouble. I received a phone call on the city desk many years ago about a shipment of eggs coming in by on three or four planes, thousands of dozens of eggs coming in, which were intended to bring down the high price of eggs. And there's just a voice on the telephone, although I believed it. I did check with the airlines to make sure such a plane or planes were coming in, and they were. So I explained this to the city editor, whose name at the time was, I think it was Harry Nichols. Who else could it be? Great Harry Nichols. And he said, yeah, go ahead, we'll just have a little fun with it. So I wrote a comical story whose headline was Hens Across the Sea, Hens, H-E-N-S.
Oh, right.
The story dealt with all these eggs coming in from points around the world to help increase the supply of eggs in New York to keep the price down. Well, it didn't turn out that way. The eggs never came in, and the price remained up. And the U.S. Attorney's Office subpoenaed me for my sources. And I said I wouldn't give them. Like good reporters do, I tore up my notes, or swallowed them, as they say. But I was subpoenaed to testify. And as I went into the U.S. Attorney's Office downtown on Foley Square, there were about 8 other reporters there from the other papers and radio stations, all of whom had been given this same exclusive tip, and all of whom had written a story on the eggs coming in from across the sea to beef up our supply here. But we were let go. We were paid $22 for appearing, and nothing came of it because we didn't know who called. We'd all been victimized by a, quote, source, right?
Right. Well, John, there were many famous people that you even interviewed and worked with at the News during your many years there. Who were some of them
Well,
our audience would know?
Of course, I mentioned Harry Nichols was a city editor, one of the greatest in the country, and who was played by Clark Gable in one of the movies. I forget the name of it. In one of those newspaper movies, Clark was supposed to have been Harry Nichols.
Oh yeah, that was the one with Doris Day,
Doris
I think.
Day,
Teacher's
that's correct.
Pet,
Yeah,
I think
is
was
that it?
called. Yeah.
Okay, now Harry, of course, was a great guy. There was a picture editor I worked with who was my boss, whose name was George Schmidt, who had an uncanny ability to get pictures, get his photographers to make pictures. And any reporter can get a story, a story 4 hours before the deadline on write-up. But once you miss a picture, once you miss that picture, you're out of business. You've either got to steal it from another photographer, from another paper, or pay him secretly, or the Associated Press, which may have covered that, may send one to you. But if you miss it, we were a picture paper in those days, the best. If you missed it, you missed it. But the story could always be written in for George Schmidt, as I said, he had an uncanny ability to get that picture before anybody else.
That was the slogan,
Yeah.
New York's
Right.
picture newspaper,
Right.
the Daily News.
And there's also Carl Warren, for whom I work, who had won a Pulitzer Prize on social diseases, a nice subject, and who was the editor of the desk that wrote the news around the clock for the station WNEW. And he was quite a guy who taught me a lot. And of course, I've worked with other people at the news more lately. Jimmy Breslin and I worked on several stories together. He, of course, is a columnist and as a special writer. I as a reporter.
Ed Sullivan, I believe you told me.
Yeah, Ed Sullivan. Would you believe that as a high school reporter, I could interview anybody I wanted, and I had one at Helen Hayes at one of the theaters appearing in some sort of a show, and I always admired Ed Sullivan and Walter Winchell because they were gossip columnists and the ideals.
Yeah.
So as a high school correspondent, I went up to the news at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, at his deadline time, I might add, at the worst time to go up, but I had just gotten out of school. I told him I wanted to interview him. He said, "Look, kid," he said, "let me tell you what you're going to write because you're here at the wrong time, and just say this, this, and that, and so forth." So I wrote it all down, and he said, "And by the way, nobody knows that I have a twin brother. Mention him." Sullivan, as you all know, or may know, came from Portchester, right up here.
Right.
It's another person that gave me a great deal of joy working at the news. And up at WPIX, and I was there very briefly in 1948, during the presidential election of Harry Truman, I think. I met Gloria Swanson there. She was one of the stars before Sunset Boulevard, I think. And I got to meet her and John Tillman, Jack McCarthy.
Jimmy Powers.
Jimmy Powers.
Even I remember those.
Yeah, Jimmy lived right up here, I think, in Tarrytown, and
is still alive, I believe.
I think
also.
he is. I believe he is. Yes.
By the way, folks, if you just tuned in, you're watching the Talk of Tuckahoe. I'm Paul Votano, and my guest is John Randazzo
Of Tuckahoe.
of Tuckahoe. Many years with the New York Daily News, and we're discussing his career. But right now I want to turn it to your opinions of what you think it takes. What are the attributes of a good newspaper person?
Well, first of all, he's got to be fair. She's got to be fair, which is to say that you've got to balance your story. Whichever side gives you its side of the story, you must get the other side as well. If I accuse, or if the government accuses somebody of this and that, and you write about it and get only the government side, that's not being fair. That's not being balanced. That's the most important attribute.
I wonder if that's taught in the journalism schools. I mean, I studied journalism myself
Where did you
at
study?
NYU.
Oh, yeah, that's a great school.
And I don't recall being told to, balance stories. I mean, you were told to report, the what, when, how, and where, and all that
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
But you're absolutely correct, and you don't get enough balanced reporting, in my opinion. It seems
That's
to be
very true.
weighted one way or the other,
Well, look at what's
to make
happening.
a point.
What's happening in the Simpson case today? You got Judge Ito telling the press it's not doing the job it should. It's just not doing the work it should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Lance Ito has a reputation as a good judge. Newspapermen have a reputation of being fair, but I think his criticism mostly is to television and the cameras, maybe, I'm not sure. But the media is generally lumped as not doing its job, which I feel is unfair, but
It is.
It is being said, though.
Yeah, it is, because the people have the idea that the media is this one big block, and it's all the same, and they shouldn't treat it that way. There are a lot of great reporters out there, and have been for many years, and for them to be lumped in with some of these other
very true.
guys is not fair. But I guess to make a point, you have to do it that way. John, over the years, have you or did you pattern yourself after anyone in particular, or were there some people in the business that you admired? Maybe not that you did, that you worked with, but that you admired from afar, so to speak?
Yes, I thought that when I was very young, by that I mean 12 or 13, 14, listening on radio to Walter Winchell, I thought he was a cat's meow, actually, and everyone who wanted to be a newspaper guy or a reporter wanted to be like Walter Winchell, which really wasn't newspapering, because Walter did what is known in the business as dot dash, you know, an item that contained 6 or 7 words, then you go on to another item, and his column was filled with perhaps 100 items, and that is not really newspapering, but we all thought at that age, the early teens, that this guy's really the cat's meow. He'd made movies, made a lot of money. But the newspaper business is not that. It's a lot of hard work, checking your sources, writing the best story you can as quickly as possible, and with very poor pay, I might add, in those days.
Are there any people on the scene now that you particularly respect or admire that are reporting or even columnists today?
Well, there's Wills.
George Will?
Yeah.
Or Gary Wills?
Yeah. Well, whatever his name is, he's a,
George Will.
He's a man with a lot of will,
right.
A lot of willpower.
Yes.
And I like Novak rather.
Right, Bob Novak.
Yeah, and I like on television, on 13,
oh, the McNeil-Lehrer report,
Lehrer,
yes.
Yeah,
that's very well done.
Very fair.
Yeah.
And they have a lot of time to do it in. And
they started out as a half hour, and
yeah.
found that you were right. They didn't have enough time.
No time, no, not
and
to do it
the
fairly,
hour
yeah.
does a terrific job.
Of course, I like William Buckley as well, and Charlie Krautmeyer is his name.
Oh,
very good.
Krauthammer, yeah.
Is that his name?
These are people I see that you like who use words well.
Pete Hammer, or Pete
Hamill, yeah.
Another great guy. He was up here covering the, I think the Bronfman trial for the news, doing profile pieces while I was there in the courthouse doing the story. Peter is a very talented guy and up from the ranks, so to put it. A good person. And of course, Jimmy Breslin is a pretty nice guy too.
He's been around quite a while now.
Jimmy has been around and about from paper to paper.
Right.
Which is just like his personality, I might add.
But he gets down into the trenches, doesn't he?
He's in the trenches all the time.
Yeah, right. John, what are you doing right now? How are you keeping busy these days?
Well, you know, when you retire from a newspaper and you've been writing all these years, you want to keep writing. So I've been doing some work for the Times lately over the last couple of years, doing features on a, they call it contribution basis. I call it stringing, you know, freelancing. This is a good tabloid word for it. And they're very, very nice people, I might add. And I write for the Times. I don't know if my people at the news are going to like that, but as time goes by, so does everything else.
Your time is your own now,
right.
So
time is my own. I try to stay in shape with some tennis, some walking, a little jogging here and there, and hoping that it all turns out for the best.
Now, I believe you told me that you and your wife spend about 5 months of the year in Florida these days?
Yeah, we have a condo in Florida.
What town are you in
In Fort Lauderdale.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and there are many people from Westchester in Fort Lauderdale.
That's true, yeah.
And who visit there and who live there 4 or 5 months of the year, which I did not know. And that may be the basis for a story for the Times, a kind of a Turner thesis in reverse, where what is Westchester bringing into Fort Lauderdale, you know?
Well, I know the Hollywood area down there has a colony of people from Tuckahoe.
Really? I didn't know that.
It's phenomenal.
That
would be a story in itself.
Well, I know people in Fort Lauderdale and other parts of Florida, the South Florida, Hollywood, and Pompano Beach, and Delray Beach, Boca Raton, who have lived in Yonkers or Eastchester or Bronxville or Points North, and live there now 4 or 5 months of the year. They get away from the cold weather, which I can't stand because of my health. I had Bell's palsy, and it froze the right side of my face, which is all healed right now, but once it gets cold, the nervous system that supplies the face with its movements freezes up on me.
Well, then you wouldn't have enjoyed the past winter. I'm glad you were down in Florida and missed all of the 18 blizzards we had.
I heard about them.
John, I know you've touched on some of the things that you think reporters should keep in mind when they're doing their stories, but do you have any other advice for would-be journalists coming into this business?
Yes. Try to get a second job if you can. Because although the work, the job's paid pretty well right now, the unions, the newspaper guild is gone for all intents and purposes, broken by publishers in New York, 1 or 2 of them. I don't have to mention their names. I'd rather not dignify them by mentioning them. Get a second job or a profession of some kind in addition to your newspapering that you can fall back on. Do that.
Like the public relations business,
Public
for example?
relations, yeah. Get some PR under your belt somehow. As long as you can write, you can handle public relations for a personality, a corporation, a business, a restaurant.
Maybe write speeches for executives.
If they'll have you, I'm sure you'll work. But you got to go out and sell that. You got to go out and tell them, I can do this. And then do it free if you have to for a week or 2. And merchandise yourself that way. But this is something else. Stay in the business. If you like newspapering, you'll go into it somehow, but you're going to be in for disappointments, because I've seen too many of them over the last 15 years. Newspapers in New York, we had, what, 10 of them once?
Oh, gosh.
Now there's 2 or 3.
Many. Right.
So it's not a dying craft. The business is dying. There'll always be writers. Writers are a dime a dozen.
Well, John, what does the future hold for you? Are you going to continue to write?
Probably. I'll do something like that. There's no novel in me. I had a novel in me.
What about this book your wife is encouraging you to write?
Well,
Sounds like it's a good one.
Well, I started the book many years ago, about 15 or 20 years ago, and the book would have been entitled The Myth of the Mafia, meaning there is no mafia, as far as I'm concerned. And
that would be unique.
Yes, it is very unique.
Yes.
And I'm wondering whether it would sell. But I've interviewed several of the so-called families in New York, so-called, because if you interview them and tell them you're doing it for this reason, they won't talk to you because they consider it an insult of the highest form. They'll tell you there is no mafia. And that was going to be the theme of my book, that it's just a very great phrase coined by somebody many years ago, and my paper, The News, was one of the most grievous offenders of this myth, because everything you wrote for the news that had a gangster element became a mafia crime or an Italian crime, because it connotes that. And that was going to be my book, but it took so much work and research, and I was wondering if the publishers would spend money on it, because everybody knows that there is a mafia, don't we? We all know that. So to write that there isn't is like shoveling you-know-what against the tide.
That would be unique. Well, John, it's been a pleasure having you on the Talk of Tuckahoe.
Thank you.
And I want to wish you continued success and good health. And ladies and gentlemen, we hope you've enjoyed the program on the Talk of Tuckahoe. I'm Paul Votano. Our guest has been John Randazzo. And we once again want to thank the folks here at Alex and Henry's for lending us the premises. And we'll see you all again next time. John, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Okay.